Hey guys, just before the video starts, we're hosting a composition challenge in the Squash Discord this weekend. You can join with the link in the description or the pinned comment to participate, or just to chat with the community. The history of Reason Studios dates back to 1994, when a group of music enthusiasts came together with the goal of creating software that would make it easier for people to create and produce their own music. In the years that followed, the team at Propellerhead worked to develop and refine their software, eventually releasing their flagship product, Reason, in 2000. From their humble beginnings in the 1990s to their current status as a leader in the music production industry, Propellerhead has always been at the forefront of pushing the boundaries for what's possible in the world of music. Let's take a look at the guys who created Reason, as well as what led to Propellerhead creating the software. In 1994, three men by the names of, I don't know how to pronounce them as a dumb American, so I'll just put the names on screen. Anyways, these three guys founded Propellerhead Software. The first public release from Propellerhead was a very simple sample loop editor called Recycle. They would actually partner with Steinberg, who created Cubase, to make Recycle a companion to Cubase. Only 3 years later, they would launch their second product, which was Rebirth RB338. This was a step-based programmable sequencer that digitally emulated Roland instruments. It became wildly successful because it was an affordable alternative to buying bulky and expensive hardware like the original Roland synthesizers and drum machines. This would be a key moment leading up to Propellerhead's success because they continued to maintain a good working relationship with Roland, who had a stellar reputation in the music production industry. The last step before Reason would be created was the launch of Rewire, which was a joint project between Steinberg and Propellerhead that connected the Cubase sequencer to their previous project, Rebirth. Later on in the year 2000, they decided to spin off and focus on their newest product, which would eventually become the Reason DAW that we use today. Reason's original launch was a pretty huge deal. It not only came packed with everything under the sun for a producer to play with, but it was also very competitively priced in comparison to its peers. I think one of the best features of Reason early on is its virtual rack for hosting and routing instruments and audio effects. This allowed people to collaborate no matter what DAW you wanted to use, and I wish other programs had instrument racks that were as easy to use as Reason's. It would later become capable of being loaded into any other DAW of your choice so that you can use Reason's workflow outside of the program itself. This virtual rack is probably one of the most cited reasons for why people decide to use Reason as their DAW of choice. Being able to set up your workflow in the way you want is super important for producers and engineers, and I think other companies can learn from Reason in this regard. I think the other thing people often cite when giving their examples of why they use Reason would be the user-friendly approach they take to their interface. Because the program was originally designed by musicians, they have a keen ability to understand what things need to be added and where they need to go on the interface. Contrary to that, I'm an FL Studio user, and I can admit readily that the interface on FL is not great for beginners, and I'd say the same for a number of other programs like Pro Tools as well. Something else I think a lot of people can appreciate about Reason is that all of its stock plugins have a very analog and retro look to them, emulating the hardware from the 80s and 90s. Things like their channel EQ or M-Class plugins are instantly recognizable, especially if they're placed into the virtual rack. Version 1 was a great addition to the music production scene, and we'd only wait 2 years for the second version to come out. In September of 2002, we'd see Propellerhead release Reason version 2, which had a bunch of cool additions. We'd see a few new plugins like the Sound Destruction Unit, which is a distortion plugin that is described as being able to lightly tape distort all the way to total sonic chaos. We'd also see a large update to the mixer, as it now had the ability to have your 4 effect sends in stereo mode. On top of that, we get a few updates to the virtual mixer called a Remix, which is separate from the global mixer that can be added to the virtual rack. Its chained auxiliary sockets can now be used to share one set of effects on 2 separate instances of the plugin. Something else that would be added in the plugin department is the RV7000 reverb device. This was paired with the Remix plugin's new stereo capabilities and also has a very analog feel to its interface. Another addition to the virtual rack was the BV512 vocoder, which is a much more tempered and old school effect which has up to 32 bands for filtering. Again, all of these plugins continue with their more hardware-themed style, which is a constant with Reason plugins. Even to this day, the look of Reason can be traced back to its original look and feel. Now I'd like to circle back for a second to the Sound Destruction Unit, aptly named Scream 4. It has 10 different distortion algorithms as well as a knob labeled Damage Control, which is the input gain level. It is an absolutely beautifully simple plugin that I wish other companies would try emulating, as none of the distortion plugins that I've used come close with other DAWs compared to Scream 4. Now, both version 3 and 4 were massive for Propellerhead, as we not only get goodies in the program itself, but also a lot of external happenings. In terms of internal additions, version 3 would bring a vast amount of sound banks to the stock list, as well as some more additional patches to Combinator, which is like a mini rack that lets you combine any sounds you want from different devices. We'd also see a somewhat weird addition, although it does sound cool, and that's the ability for the browser to use text-to-speech when searching through sounds and plugins. In version 4, the Thor synthesizer was added, which is a polysonic synth that combines over 50 years of old-school synth technology. It has a massive 6 different oscillators and 4 different filters. I talked to a few people in my Discord as well as on Reddit, and Thor is definitely one of the classics when it comes to Reason users. The Regroove mixer was also added as an option on the virtual rack. This plugin is absolutely fantastic, and its nickname is the Unquantizer. At its most basic level, it allows you to add the human element back to computerized music by making your drum patterns or melodies have imperfections in their timing and velocity. This is something producers have been doing since the dawn of computer technology, because music just sounds better when it feels like it was played by a human rather than created by a dirty computer in the basement. Now, let's take a look at some of the things that happened outside the DAW, but are great additions regardless. In 2006, just before version 4 launched, Propellerhead started uploading posts to their blog. These posts consisted of tutorials, updates, and guides for anything under the sun when it came to music production. I think that more companies who create in the music production space should have something like this, as it's a hub for users to gather and learn, collaborate, and create together. On top of that, the Propellerhead YouTube channel was launched in 2007, which contained much of the same content as the blog did, except in video format. We'd get to see interviews from DJs, new plugins, and tutorials provided by the official company. If that wasn't enough, they also created an artist stories section on their website which showcased different artists' music who used Reason to create their products. It's always a pleasure to see companies working with the people who use their products in such a community-oriented way. I haven't mentioned this until now, but during the release of version 5 and 6, a large update happened to another product that Reason Studios created, and that would be the version 1.5 of their Record software. Record is a sister software to the Reason DAW and is much more geared towards trying to replicate the studio experience for recording, arrangement, and mixing in a virtual environment. It can be used in tandem with Reason or by itself to create projects. Another big change happened with these versions of the software, and that was the addition of blocks for arrangement. This system is similar to that of the pattern block system that FL Studio used to use for arrangement on your playlist, and was a welcome addition that allowed for multiple types of workflows. Neptune was also released during this time period, which is a pitch correction tool as well as a vocal synthesizer. One of the coolest functions of Neptune is the fact that you can generate harmonies from MIDI that you create. Another classic plugin was made here as well, and that's the Kong Drum Designer, which is a drum sequencer. However, it does not have a sequencer of its own and instead uses the internal Reason sequencer. It's capable of both synthesis and sample playback and is definitely one of the most widely used plugins to this day. On top of this, the Dr. Octo Rex Loop Player plugin released alongside version 5. This plugin functions similarly to SliceX or other sample-based looping plugins that allow you to turn a sample into a playable instrument via a MIDI keyboard. This would also mark a turning point for Propellerhead, where they released a streamlined version of Reason called Essentials that came with an abundance of plugins, sounds, and instruments that cost less money than the full version for anyone wanting to dip their toes into Reason for the first time. Another new plugin that would come along with this update was the Echo device for the virtual rack. There was a delay plugin which took some notes from the Roland RE201 tape delay. In 2013 and onward, we'd receive versions 7, 8, and 9, amongst a bunch of other stuff not internal to the DAW. One of which actually happened in 2015, which is the creation of the forum called Reason Talk that is unaffiliated with Propellerhead. It's a hub for all things related to the program as well as music production. One of the things I think Propellerhead is great at is fostering a community surrounding their products, and this includes unofficial communities alongside their blog and news posts. In terms of things added to the program itself though, we got the ability to create grouped bus channels on the mixer, so you can submix multiple sounds or instruments with a single fader, which can be used for sidechaining or just to be able to control many sounds volumes at once. Propellerhead also stepped into the modern day with this version, finally allowing you to authorize a permanent copy of Reason to your specific computer with a web portal, rather than using a dongle like previous versions. A bunch of other cool stuff happened that was not plugin related, like being able to automatically quantize and slice audio, which is extremely useful for people working with samples. In the plugin department though, we finally got the ability to have MIDI out on the virtual rack, which can communicate with both hardware and digital MIDI devices. Another thing that came along would be the Spectrum EQ, which is attached to every single mixer insert inside Reason, a feature I think all DAWs should have. FL Studio does technically have an extremely basic EQ on each mixer, but it's pretty much unusable for anything outside very broad edits. The reason I mentioned 3 versions at once here is because we received them in such rapid succession. Version 8 came only 8 months after 7 and was one of the first times Reason got a big visual change. I think this happened because during this time, a bunch of companies were trying on the newly popular minimalistic style, and Reason did as well, removing a lot of 3D effects for a more flat and modern look, which I am personally a fan of. However, I'm not exactly sure it fits with Reason's previous aesthetic. We'd also received 2 different digital amps for guitar and bass, which are aptly named Amp and Bass Amp. Both of these plugins look absolutely great with their analog feel and also work like a charm for being so simple. Only 2 years later, we get version 9, and oh boy did this shake things up. Firstly, a pitch correcting tool was added directly into the sequencer, which I think more DAWs need to do. Having dedicated plugins that are always in reach on any track is a wonderful thing. On top of that, we also got a new category of devices for the virtual rack dubbed Players by Propellerhead. These plugins are dual arpeggiator, note echo, and scales and chords, and they don't act like normal devices. Instead, they're placed on top of the instrument they are attached to and provide unique sounding effects. Another thing that got added that is oh so sweet is the ability to bounce in place. This essentially means you can take any clip on the sequencer and render it out to a WAV file for whatever purpose you want. Mostly this is done to save on CPU, but there are other advantages, and I personally use this feature in FL Studio all the time. And now we reach the modern day with version 10, 11, and 12. Life is damn good for Reason users at this point. The program has an absurd amount of tools at your disposal to create whatever you want, and with these 3 versions, they expanded that tool belt massively. With version 10, we got the Europa synthesizer. This is Propellerhead's take on a massive sounding wavetable synth, much like Vital or Serum. This one synth is touted as the best of all time when it comes to plugins that come with Reason, and I would tend to agree. Propellerhead also called version 10 the biggest update ever to come for Reason users. I would definitely agree with this statement, as version 10 and onward would showcase an absurd amount of content, including 3 GB of drum samples, 2 new synths, live instruments including an acoustic piano, and the grain sample manipulator plugin for the virtual rack. We'd also receive Complex 1 with version 11, which is a modular synthesizer with 4 times oversampling and a huge amount of stock patches. Also, it was now possible to use a virtual hardware interface on the top of its rack to virtually route cables to different devices. We'd also see new pricing models with Essentials being axed in favor of 3 new tiers, which were Intro, Suite, and the regular version. The Suite option was for people who wanted the entire Reason experience wrapped up with a bow, which came with a massive 70 devices for the virtual rack, including that acoustic piano plugin I mentioned earlier called Radical Keys. Something else I think was a great choice was making the virtual rack inside Reason a standalone plugin that could be purchased and used in other DAWs. This is something I wish more companies did because people want to be able to use the workflow they like, but also the flexibility of purchasing a plugin that may not come with the DAW that they use. This era would also mark the end for Propellerhead, as they restructured their company and renamed it to Reason Studios, becoming more focused on Reason itself. Some other interesting things added here would be Algorithm, an FM synth that was released in 2021. It's an instrument that is heavily influenced by the FM synthesizers from the 80s, and it also contains a randomizer function, which will morph your current patch into a new random sound. I think it's definitely safe to say at this point that Reason has become a household name and is here to stay in the music production industry. Some of the most popular artists and producers of all time have used this program at some point, including Rick Rubin, Skrillex, Flying Lotus, and Bass Nectar. It was a complete pleasure reading about the history of this company and program. It's definitely one of the more eccentric players in the digital audio workstation world, and if you're at all interested in this stuff, I highly recommend you check it out for yourself. I hope you guys enjoyed learning about Reason with me. Thank you for watching, stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next video.